Welcome to Exposure Therapy. On today's episode, I have an amazing Canadian photographer, or at least a photographer in Canada. We'll get to that. That is a Nikon Ambassador, Ms. Viktoria Haack. Viktoria, thank you so much for coming on today. Really appreciate you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you.
So when I first picked up a camera in I got my first camera in 2015. I went to the internet to learn, and to YouTube, to Instagram, to all of that. And you, I think, were one of the first accounts I came across that I fell in love with. And it might be because I love mountains and was looking for mountain photos or something of the sort. And because you're out, I think, in British Columbia, you had you had a lot of those to show. So that's how I got turned on to you and your work. And there's another landscape photographer, Nigel Danson. There's you and him. Are kind of the two that I just absolutely love and that I can't get enough of. And so I just really appreciate you coming on today. And I'd love to hear kind of how you got into photography, how you kind of came to be.
Okay, thank you. That's very kind. Thank you very much. How I got into photography, I was always interested in the arts. And when I was at school, I did lots of art. I went to art college. I did a little bit of photography when I was, doing my foundation course in art and design. But I wanted to be a fine art sculptor. And I started a degree, but then I dropped out kind of 3 months in, worked for a while, and then went back to university to study art history. So I've always kind of had a really kind of arty background. And I ended up studying more kind of anthropology than art history, but that's another whole side of things. But I ended up living on a small island in the UK, which was a nature reserve and only 500 acres in size. So a really small island. I lived there for 10 years with my husband, and we had a daughter, and always had a dog, and just spent a lot of time walking around the island. And I would notice how, because I was in such a confined space, I would notice how the light affected, the same pathways that I would walk over and again, and how seasons affected things. And so I just wanted to record it. It was really beautiful. So picked up my camera that I was given for my 18th birthday. And much like you, because I lived on an island, I turned to the internet to kind of help me to learn and to share my work and that kind of stuff. So that was kind of the beginning for me. And I've been working professionally for about 15 years now, which is as long as I've been in Canada. And I've been working as a full-time professional for about 4 or 5 years now. So that's kind of my journey, I think.
So you've been in Canada, you said, for 15 years. And did you go directly to where you are now, or did you kind of pop around a little bit and finally settle on the West Coast?
I'm actually in Salmon Arm. So I'm in BC, but I'm midway between Vancouver and Calgary, for people that don't know where that is. So it's quite a small town. And this is where we came. I had family here. Initially, we were going to go to Vancouver Island, but we ended up in Salmon Arm. And when we were living on the island, we had those 500 acres. And I was really keen to just, go somewhere with something more to see, like, more mountains, just, being here in BC, it's so beautiful.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. I've never seen a landscape quite as beautiful as the Canadian Rockies. I know you sent me some photos from not just in BC, but there's endless subject matter. And as you mentioned too, even on the small island, you really paid attention to how the light would affect the, you have a small area, but the light can change it from day to day, from moment to moment. And what kind of light do you like to shoot in?
I like everything. There isn't really, there's the classic kind of, I like to shoot at sunrise and sunset, and I used to very much feel that way. But these days I like shooting in everything. I find it challenging sometimes, and I really like that challenge. So even when it's really bright and sunny out, you know, just working with the light and not feeling like, oh, I'm not going to shoot because it's too sunny. Or, you know, these days I just like to just go out, see what presents itself and how am I going to deal with it. And so I find it challenging and I really enjoy it. So I don't really have a favorite type of light, really. You know, everything is good.
Yeah, I like that. When you go out, I don't how far. First of all, how far off the beaten path do you go when you're taking these photos? Like, are you close to an access way, or do you like go hiking for, you know, for a couple hours to get into the kind of bush to take your pictures? Like, what's that process like for you?
I do both. So sometimes I'm literally just steps from my front door, and I might just shoot, you know, because I quite like shooting smaller scenes as well as bigger kind of grander scenes. And I think when we were kind of locked down with COVID, that was an opportunity for me to kind of look at the smaller scenes that I might not have otherwise paid attention to. It reminded me of those kind of images that I wanted to shoot. But I do both. You know, sometimes I'll be out in the backcountry, and sometimes I'm just, you know, down the road a little way and just off a trail or something. So yeah, I shoot in all sorts of different types of places, really, and I enjoy both. I love being backcountry, and that's something that in the UK, having the amount of wilderness that you have here in Canada is not something that I was used to experiencing. So yeah, I love the fact that you can get away from people, that you can get away from cell service, that you can just get out into the middle of nowhere here. It's fantastic.
When you're going into the backwoods like that, what do you aspiring nature photographers, wildlife photographers, what do you take with you? Because I guess it's not I guess your camera gear, but then extra from your camera gear, what do you take with you?
Yes, if I'm going backcountry and I'm hiking, then I tend to kind of keep my camera gear as light as I can. But other than that, and same with kind of tripod and that kind of stuff, I take minimal gear. I have an inReach because I like to be able to, if there's an emergency, I like to be able to get help. I always have bear spray. I usually have a whistle as well, just to kind of warn animals and things that I'm coming. And then obviously, you know, layers of stuff, you know, be prepared for everything if you're backcountry. So, you know, just different layers, just in case, you know, you can start out on a nice sunny day and then suddenly, you know, it's raining or it starts to snow or something. So
Have you ever had any close encounters with animals, whether it be a bear, cougar, wolf, anything like this that you've you know, you made you sweat a little?
I did have, I'm just trying to think. I mean, when I moved from the UK, I was really nervous about wild animals because we don't, you know, in the UK we have like foxes and that's kind of it, really. There's nothing that's going to eat you out there. But when we moved here, I was quite worried about the wildlife, and we bought a house that was, the backyard was kind of surrounded because I was worried about my daughter getting eaten by something in the backyard. And so it took me a bit of time to get used to the fact that, you know, we're out there with bears and things, but I've never had a bad experience at all. And I have come across wildlife. I mean, the other day I was in Jasper National Park and I was with a friend, and I was actually photographing her amongst some trees because I wanted some human scale in there. And she suddenly said to me, "Vic, there's something coming." And, you know, she could hear something in the bushes. And then she said, "It's a bear." And, you know, there was a bear right there. And so you know, she came over to where I was so that we were both together. We made noise because the bear was busy going through the bushes, didn't know we were there. So we made some noise, stayed together. We got our bear spray out and ready. And the bear, you know, kind of eventually realized we were there and sort of went, "Oh," and then went the other way. And it was, you know, went to, you know, the whole thing went without incident, really. And I know there was one time when I was with a group of workshop participants and we were in the Tonquin Valley, and a grizzly suddenly just stood up from behind some rocks, and we didn't know the bear was there, and we'd been shooting sunrise, and suddenly this bear just stood up and we were like, "Oh my goodness." So at which point, grabbed bear spray, and a couple of the guys had gone off up a meadow and they had the sun in their eyes and they were coming down, and the bear started to walk up towards them. So they tried to, like shout and there's a bear coming, just so they could see and they knew what was coming. But no, I mean, I go out a lot with my dog. He's always on a leash because he doesn't listen. So I have to keep him with me. But he's a really good warning for any kind of wildlife. He lets me know if there's something there. He often knows about things I have no idea there's a bear or something, but he does. And he makes a lot of noise, and it gives me an opportunity to, kind of make noise myself, stand still, hold on to him, get my bear spray ready. But we've always been okay. We've always, fingers crossed, nothing bad so far.
How old is Jack? That's his name, right?
Yeah, Jack. Yeah, he's 6 now. Yeah,
And
he's calmed down a lot. He was really, really difficult to handle for the first 2 years. I never thought I would be able to do photography with him, because he would literally give me 30 seconds and then he was just jumping on top of me and, like biting me. And, and I was thinking, I'll never be able to do photography with this dog. But we persevered. I kept taking him places. I would just, have a long leash and kind of clip him to a tree or something, because I couldn't hang on to him while I was trying to take photos. And he's now got to the point where the camera comes out, he just lies down and waits, and he's really good. So, and he often sits literally with his back against my back. So I'll sit down to shoot something and I'll feel his back slide against my back, and he's scanning, the bushes and trees behind me. Which is great. He literally has my back. So he's really great to photograph with now.
He's a big boy too, right? Malamute, just strict Malamute, yeah?
Yeah, he's pretty big. So, I mean, he's, for most animals and people, you're not going to just walk up to him. He's fairly intimidating to look at, which is good sometimes.
So you mentioned you encountered this one grizzly on your workshops, and that's something I did want to talk to you about, is your workshops. You do them locally, as well as I believe I caught you did one recently in Scotland. Mm-hmm. And so how do, like, what's the logistics of these? Like, what does the kind of operations look like? Like, how many people do you take out? Kind of, how do you arrange your day?
So I usually do it with another photographer. So there's usually at least 2 of us that are leading. And for some of our workshops, for example, our Scotland one, there are 4 leaders. Our Iceland one, there are 3 leaders. So we tend to have a good, ratio of leaders to participants. And then our maximum number is normally somewhere around 10 or 12 people. So we try and keep it to small numbers of participants, so that we can interact with people, give them as much help as they might want. Yeah.
Do you take them? Do you just go to one specific spot? Do you take them around to different areas, or how does that work?
Oh yeah. So we go to lots of different areas, and we tend to organize workshops around weather conditions. So we don't necessarily just say we're going to go to this place on this day. We tend to look at forecasts and things, figure out where might be the best place to go, depending on different weather conditions and that kind of stuff. So yeah, they're usually, we have a few places that we maybe want to try and, get to on our during the workshop, but we'll organize those according to, as I say, kind of weather, where it looks like it would be best to shoot on that day and that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Do you, as a role, as a part of your role as a Nikon ambassador, do you conduct workshops on their behalf as well?
I haven't done one specifically for Nikon. They do I think they do photo walks and things sometimes, but I haven't done that. So no, not specifically.
How did you, I guess, how did you Nikon come into a relationship?
I think that was well, the first contact I had with Nikon was they asked me if I would kind of be a social media partner with them. So that was my first contact, and that was wonderful. And that was really the start of our relationship. And then they asked me if I would speak for them in Toronto at a photography just trying to think of the right word, like an expo thing. And that was one of my first experiences of public speaking. I'd spoken to a few camera clubs before that, but I was, I don't find public speaking that easy. So being asked to do that was a little bit scary, and I had to kind of work through some stuff to do that. But I really, wanted to extend my partnership with them if I could. And so I kind of pushed through it and spoke for them. It obviously must have gone okay, because they asked me after that if I would become an ambassador. So I was really happy to do that. I mean, I've shot Nikon all my life, and so if you're asked by the company that you've been working with forever, working with their equipment forever, it feels really nice to be appreciated in that way. So yeah, it was really cool.
You mentioned that they reached out to you at first to have some sort of social media partnership.
Mm-hmm.
Were you doing something to grab their attention, like tagging like their brand or hashtagging, or how did they come to notice you?
I think I have to be very grateful to Michelle Valberg, who's already an ambassador. And I didn't know Michelle, but I believe that she mentioned me to Nikon, and they came across me that way. But I know that one of the best ways of, having a brand with a partnership is often kind of tagging and hoping to be noticed that way. I know for Nikon, if you are a professional and you belong to their Nikon professional service, that's another way. You have to submit information about your website and what have you to become a member of that. And so I think that's another good way of, certainly with Nikon. I don't know about the other brands, how they do it. What do you shoot actually?
I shoot Canon. Yeah, right. We can still be friends. That's okay.
No, we can't. Yeah, we can.
No, I started one Christmas. My parents had gotten me a little Rebel kit, and that's what I learned on. So eventually, when I decided to upgrade to a mirrorless system, I actually had my eyes on Sony for since the Sony mirrorless first came out, and I was just eyeing it. Yeah. And then when it came time to finally buy something, it was only at that moment that I thought, okay, I actually got an R6, but I'm like, I'm gonna go into the R system because I already know the Canon kind of ecosystem, so it's going to be like a much shorter learning curve for me. So that was basically
that's often the way. I think people start off with a brand and then they feel comfortable, and yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I wouldn't turn down an ambassadorship or partnership with Sony or Nikon or Fuji or whoever, right? Yeah. But I feel really comfortable with Canon. We're actually on it right now on the Canon. Right. Acts as a little webcam there. So I can tell that. I can understand why Nikon would ask you to partner with them when they see your work, because when I saw your Instagram profile again, it was just like amazed at some of your work here. Very painterly. You have your landscapes. You have some of your dog Jack there as well. He actually has his own Instagram account.
Yes, yeah.
And a bunch of other things here. So let's get talking about some of these images. So right here is your man himself. Can you tell me about kind of the story behind this photo? How where was this taken, first of all?
Sure. Yeah. That one was taken fairly close to me, so somewhere called Blind Bay. So it's probably about 20 minutes, I think, from where I live. And I was just there, I think one weekend, so maybe on a Saturday or something. I was with my husband. We'd literally just gone for a dog walk. And I like going to that particular beach area because in the winter, the lake doesn't tend to freeze there. But it can be quite windy. So the wind blows, and then obviously the water blows over the rocks, and then you can get some quite interesting ice formation. So it's one of the places I like to go to kind of see what ice has formed, see what kind of shapes there are. I've shot quite a few landscape shots from there with sunrises and sunsets and what have you. But we were there in the middle of the day, and it was lightly snowing at the time. And I really liked how some of the ice had formed on the rocks that you can see there. So I figured I would try and take a shot. And as I was lining it up, I thought, well, it might be fun rather than just having the landscape elements, which obviously I have that shot without Jack in it. But I thought, let's see what it looks like with my husband in and with the dog in there as well. So I put the camera on a tripod. My tripod goes very low to the ground. And I set the shot up before having Jack in there. And I focus stacked the image because I wanted the foreground elements to be as sharp as the stuff in the background. So I'm not sure if you know too much about focus stacking, but basically it enables you to have that sharp focus front to back. So I set the image up, focus stacked, I think about 3 or 4 shots ready. And then I thought, okay, so then we'll bring Jack in and see whether or not we can get him to be in the image. So my husband was with him first. That it was really slippery on top of those rocks. So they're both kind of sliding around up there. My husband we nearly had a divorce situation. He was like, what are you asking me to do? I'm sliding around on here. And then of course, Jack didn't want to be there particularly. You know, he doesn't necessarily, you can't just ask him to sit and stay. He doesn't do that. So he's moving around and howling. And then, you know, my husband got off so that it would just be Jack. And then of course, Jack wants to get back off because he's got back off. So it was a bit of a, you know, toing and froing situation. But eventually Jack was on the rocks. And then literally for like a couple of seconds, he sat down and then, you know, looked around and I snapped the shot. So it's always a really fast, you know, situation. And then he's always on a leash because he tends to not really listen and he can just disappear at any moment. So I always clone his leash out of the images.
I have a Siberian Husky, so I guess kind of closely related. So I understand the craziness of them. And every time we try to do a family photo and include her, like she'll sit there, she'll be fine. But as soon as you're about to set up the camera, that she'll like literally turn around backwards.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, he's exactly the same. So it's always just, you know, you might get a shot, you might not get a shot. You have to be really quick. Yeah. And then when I edited it, I wanted it to kind of have that cold feel. So I edited it towards kind of the blues and the cooler tones just to kind of make it a bit moody. And yeah. And normally I wouldn't necessarily choose to have him looking out of the shot, but I quite like it for rather than looking into the frame.
You do a lot of color grading?
Yeah, I mean, I do experiment with it a little bit with some of my images. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just watching, I was just going through your Instagram and watching one of your reels where you had the girl with the red hair on top of, like you're standing on the stump and it was like cracked dirt underneath there. Yeah.
Yeah, that one I did change. I changed her sweater because I wanted it to kind of be cohesive with the environment. So that one I did change. I mean, I don't tend to do that much normally, but for that particular image, I did change that. Yeah.
Nice. All right, I'm going to bring up this image, which is there. Yeah, and wow, like look at that, like just look at that environment too.
Yeah, it was a beautiful morning actually. So that one was again local to where I live, probably 15 minutes from my house, and I'd gone out with a friend and with Jack, and we'd gone to this lake, which I quite like to shoot. This would be probably, I think, sort of November time, so before the lake froze over. And there was a hoarfrost on the trees, and it was just kind of white cloud, flat light, nothing too much happening with the light. And then for about 10 minutes, we had some beautiful light rays that broke through, and you can just kind of see them to the top right there, coming through and backlighting the trees. And I have one of my favorite images, actually, I shot at that moment with a 70-200, just concentrating on those trees and those light rays. But I quite often have 2 cameras with me with different lenses on, one with a wider and one with a longer lens, so that I can react quite quickly to anything that's happening. So I had my 24-70 on my Z7, and I was shooting the other one with a 70-200, as I mentioned, the stuff in the distance there. And Jack I don't know what he was doing. I think he was watching some leaves or something float by. So shot this with the 24-70. And again, I had to clone his leash out of that. I have him on a long line, but I just had to clone that out of the shot. But yeah, just trying to, I was hand holding it. So just trying to line it all up so that the horizon was straight and that the wharf was, central in the frame. But it worked out quite nicely.
You're making me feel a lot better about being a husky owner and not having her listen. Now that I know you're cloning that leash out.
Yeah, if people only knew what goes on behind the scenes. It's never easy.
You mentioned you have a kind of a 2-camera setup and 2 separate lenses. The 2 big ones, the 24-70, 70-200. Do you have a preferred lens to shoot on? So part A, do you have a preferred lens? And then B, on that 2-camera setup, is it the same body?
So currently I'm shooting with the Z7 and the Z6 II, so both mirrorless. When I shot that previous image, I was shooting with the D850 and the Z7, so I was using mirrorless and DSLR. So in terms of favorite lenses, I love all of them for different reasons. I honestly can't tell you that I have a favorite lens. And I mean, if I'm shooting portraits, I love my 70-200 2.8 for its versatility. But I shoot with an 85. I shoot with, prime lenses as well. And then for landscapes, obviously I shoot with a wide angle sometimes, so 14-30 f4, but I also shoot with, if I'm hiking, a 24-100, which is quite light and a good reach on it. But I have a macro lens, and I shoot with everything really. So I couldn't say that I have a favorite. And I recently got a 100-400, which I'm really enjoying, shooting more, kind of more intimate landscape shots that I can kind of zoom into, which I'm really enjoying as well.
Amazing. And then probably also grab some of that wildlife, from a further distance.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really shot because I haven't had the lenses for it. I've not really shot a lot of wildlife in the past, but now that I do have a longer lens, I am, getting more interested in that and would love to shoot some more wildlife. Definitely. Yeah.
What kind of, or not what kind of photography, I guess, what photographers do you kind of enjoy their work? Do you go back to kind of look at their work to see what they're doing?
Oh my goodness, there's so many. I don't know where to start really. I love so many different types of photography, and I love so many different photographers' work that I could not name anybody specifically really. I just enjoy seeing different styles, everything, from I love portrait stuff. I love, small intimate scenes. So many different photographers that I love really. I'd feel bad to even name anybody. There isn't one specific photographer. I quite like looking at some of the European photographers as well. Living here in Canada, it's nice to have that balance of looking at, photographers in the UK and stuff, because there's usually a slightly different approach. Just to kind of, I think some of the North American work can be a little bit more vibrant, a bit kind of stronger, I don't know, a bit more shouty, if you like. And then some of the European stuff it tends to be a bit quieter, a bit more subtle. So it's nice to just look at different photographers from, different places around the world as well.
That's really interesting that you say that like North America would have kind of a brighter, like maybe higher saturation, contrast, stuff like that. And your European would be kind of like that more painterly style, like maybe muted colors, or, that really, really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. That might be a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think that there does tend to be a slightly more toned down way of editing and stuff. But I also think that part of that might be due to just how the landscape is. Like it tends to be a more kind of more muted colors. Here we have bright blue skies and sunshine and clear, very clear. Whereas in the UK, it tends to be more kind of atmosphere, in that it's often a bit rainy, or, that it's a different thing. And I remember when I first visited Canada from the UK and I looked at my photos, they looked so clear and bright and sharp in comparison to what I photographed in the UK, and I was thinking, well, you know, is it because the atmosphere is kind of cleaner, or I don't know what it is, or the light is different, or I'm not quite sure, but I'm sure that there's a whole bunch of things that maybe play into that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I know one of the things we absolutely do have here is a lot of ice.
Yeah, we do in the winter, don't we? Which is one of the things that I love about the Canadian winter, because we obviously in the UK we don't get that. So I really enjoy the Canadian winter. I love how ice completely changes a landscape. This one was taken in the Rockies, and it's behind a frozen waterfall, actually. And for this one, I loved I'm not sure if they are stalactites or stalagmites, the ones that hang down, but I loved those hanging from the ceiling. They almost felt like some kind of a magical chandelier or something. So I was just in a very small space, pressed up against the back there, trying to make this look bigger. And I shot with a 14-30 lens just to give it that kind of wider look. And I wanted the foreground elements to be in sharp focus again, as well as the background. So I focus stacked this one. And this is my friend Erin that's in the image, and asked her if she would step in just to give us a sense of scale. And then because the eye tends to go to the lightest part of a scene, I positioned her in that location so that you kind of look towards her. And then when I was editing, I wanted to make it feel like you were kind of in the dark recesses looking towards the light. So I kept it quite dark, closer to the camera, and then allowing it to go much lighter as you go further away.
Are you you're on a tripod here as well?
Yeah. So if I can be for focus stacking, it's much easier to be on a tripod, just for ease of putting the images together in Photoshop afterwards. But I mean, I have focus stack without a tripod. It's possible to do that. But I also sometimes will bracket my exposures as well to make sure that I've got the full dynamic range of an image. So I've got the lightest and the darkest parts.
Yeah, when I saw this photo when you first sent it over, I was wondering if you were just standard boots, or if you had any of those like studs or whatever on your feet to get in there.
Oh yeah. Having some spikes was definitely necessary. Yeah, it was fairly slippery just trying to get in there. Yeah.
I'd love to talk about this image here. Beautiful. And again, it looks like that's maybe a little bit of, is that some of the hoarfrost, or frost at least?
No, it's not actually.
Okay.
It's a plant called prairie smoke, and it has these little fine hairs on the plant, and when you get the light behind it, it kind of rims it with light, and the hairs pick up the light, which is really pretty. And that's what attracted me to that plant. I didn't know what it was called. I had to look it up afterwards. But I shot this one in Waterton National Park, which has loads of beautiful wildflowers in the spring. And I was just exploring a valley area and wandering around. I'd photographed sunrise. It was later in the morning, and I was just kind of exploring, and I noticed these at my feet. So I shot this one with a 105 macro. And what I will quite often do is, because it was quite a complicated scene, there were lots of bits of foliage sticking up from the ground. So sometimes I'll try and shoot through other things to soften parts of the frame and to eliminate things that could be distracting. So for this one, I put the camera on the ground. I flipped out the back screen. And I had the 105 macro on, and sometimes I will also go into manual focus and just rotate the barrel of the lens and see what the camera picks up in focus. So what is the camera choosing? Because sometimes I will think I want something in focus, but then when I roll the barrel of the lens, I'll see other things that I hadn't noticed, and then actually decide that I want that to be my focal point. So that's what I did with that one. And then when I'm editing, obviously I'm looking for something that's gonna maybe draw my eye away from the subject. So sometimes I will soften parts, of the frame that might be a bit distracting and be pulling my eye away from where I want the viewer to look.
That's a nice little pro tip there about just taking the manual focus and rotating the barrel to find where, see some of the things you didn't notice.
Yeah, because sometimes you don't, you look through and maybe you've noticed something that looks really nice, but when you, especially with a shallow depth of field, when you just roll the barrel and look through, sometimes it picks out things that you hadn't seen, and it's beautiful. And so it's almost like a lucky dip. You're just like rolling and seeing if there's something that you find interesting. And then I've shot lots of things I hadn't realized were even there or were even beautiful until I looked through the lens and saw them that way.
Today's episode is brought to you by Prairie View Photo Tours. Prairie View Photo Tours invites photographers of all levels to book their all-inclusive, authentic Alberta adventure at pvphototours.com.
This next one over here is this is the one that this kind of style is what reminds me again of another European photographer, Nigel Danson, just because of the interesting composition. Like you have the hills or the mountains off in the back there, and you have an interesting element up front here. In this case, it's snow-covered rocks and the piece of ice. And yeah, I'd love to hear about this.
Okay, so this one was shot in the Rockies, and I was with a friend, and we were driving around, and we noticed that there was some really nice light in the sky. And so we were like, ooh, look at the light. What are we going to shoot? What do we want to put in front of that? And we had no idea. So we headed to this area because we know that quite often the snow stays on the trees in this spot. It doesn't tend to come off. I think maybe there's less wind, or there's something about this particular area where the snow stays on the trees. So we were on Highway 1, and we pulled into a pullout, and we were just going to shoot with a longer lens and photograph the trees. And then I looked over the edge and noticed that there was some lovely ice around the rocks. So without really thinking about it, I kind of stepped off the edge, and then it was really deep. It was kind of, in parts up to like the tops of my hips kind of thing. I was like, oh, this is deep. So focused on, the light was nice, and I wanted to get down to those rocks. So I went down there and just got in the water and shot that again with tripod low, focus stack, just to make sure the foreground ice was sharp as well as the background. And then just had to think about how I was going to get out of there once I was done. About that. I was just like, get down there, get in there.
Get the shot and consequences later, whatever.
That's right, yeah. My friend didn't come down, actually. She stayed up the top. She had to pull me up the last little bit to get out of there. But yeah, Highway 1 is running just to the top, just above that snow on the right-hand side. It's right there. So it's just off the highway.
You were in, you said it was like waist deep. When you go into the water, because I've seen some of your other images too, where you're in the water with your tripod and everything. Are you using like hip waders, or do you just lots of changes of clothes?
I don't normally go that deep, quite honestly. I've worn hip waders a couple of times, but for the most part, I'm not normally in very deep water. But I use those. I use the boots I use are dry shod. I'm not sure whether you want me to mention any names of.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, whatever's going to be helpful to the audience for sure.
Yeah. So dry shod, because they're really warm, but they're also waterproof up to the, they come up to the knee. So they act like snow boots, but they're, better than snow boots for me in that I can actually be warm, but then also step into a lake or something and have dry feet. So yeah, they're really good for that. I really like them.
And on this image as well, you do a lot of running water shots that look like a daytime long exposure. So what are you using? What kind of filters you're using for that? And the kind of how do you operate? How do you achieve your long exposures here with the running water to get that all smoothed out?
Yeah, so sometimes because the ISO will go lower than 100 on like my Z7 and Z6 II, I can go down to, I think it's equivalent to like ISO 31 or something. Sometimes I can just do it using the camera and just taking my ISO down and playing with my settings, obviously depending on how dark or light it is. But obviously other times I need to add a filter because it's too bright to be able to do that. So I'm using case filters, which I really like because they're super easy to use. They're magnetic, so I can literally just slap them on the front really quickly if I, if I come across something that I want to shoot. Probably my go-to filter is my 6-stop. That's the one that I started with. If I was only going to have one, I'd probably have a 6-stop. And then since having that one, I've added a 3-stop and a 10-stop that I like to use for different weather conditions. Sometimes at sunset, for example, a 3-stop as the light's beginning to drop will just slow down the shutter speed just enough and not too much. So at different times I'll use different neutral density filters.
Final image I'd love to chat about, a beautiful image. And this, I'm going to hazard a guess and say this is from Scotland.
You guessed right. Yeah. Yeah. So this one is from Scotland. This one was taken on the Isle of Skye, actually. And I was there with our workshop group in the fall recently. And I photographed this tree before, and it sits in front of the mountains here, and it's really beautiful. And so we thought we would have a stop here. It's a really lovely spot. And actually, when we got there, it was raining. But then we noticed that the rain was kind of coming across the mountains and then was being backlit. And it all happened very quickly. It wasn't raining when we first started, but suddenly it was raining, and the rain was moving behind the tree. And we were all kind of frantically trying to frame up something while running around in boggy, marshy kind of grass. And yeah, very simple shot. I think I shot this one at f5 or f5.6. I wanted to kind of isolate the tree against the background. I didn't want it to merge in with the background. So I shot it with a shallower depth of field. And I was just kind of moving to position the tree with the changing situation that was happening with the rain and the light, and trying to get the mountains in there as well. So it was a lot of running around, stumbling over very uneven ground, trying to just kind of frame up something. And there was a group of us as well, so trying not to get in each other's way, and everyone trying to grab shots of that tree. But yeah, I love the kind of rainy atmosphere. I love it when I love images where you have things like rain or snow or things that really help to create mood.
What about photography in general that got you into this? Like, what, at the end of the day, what do you find to you is the most rewarding thing about it?
About photography?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, so many possible answers to that one. I'm kind of obsessed with it. So like it's everything really. But I think photography has opened my eyes, I would say is the thing. I see so much more because of photography. I'm always looking harder, looking at different things, seeing patterns in things, appreciating nature even more because of photography. So yeah, I mean, and I've because I shoot so many different types of photography, I shoot weddings and different things too. I've met so many wonderful people. I get to be a part of their lives on very special days. I've seen really good things, really bad things. Photography's just allowed me to experience so much. Yeah, it's kind of it's been my main thing. It's like it's everything really.
So you conduct workshops on a regular basis, and you're out there just shooting up a storm. What projects do you have do you have any specific projects you're doing right now? Like, what are any irons in the fire?
Nothing that I can really. There's something, but I can't talk about that. There's something I can't talk about, but I mean, I have workshops coming up. I'll be speaking at the Light Chasers Conference, which is a nature and landscape photography conference in Pincher Creek. That's coming up. I think it's May time. And then following that, I'm doing a workshop with Monica Deviat in Waterton National Park. So we'll be taking a few people there. And then I've got my kind of, I've got lots of different things happening, but usually my summer, is dotted with shooting a few weddings here and there as well. And then I have a Rockies workshop in the fall. And then we have a Scotland and an Iceland workshop as well. So it gets, kind of busier on the workshop front towards the end of the year. But yeah, lots going on. This is my quietest time, and I'm trying to, really enjoy not having so much happening right now. Nice.
The calm before the storm.
Yeah.
Viktoria, we have your website and your Instagram. You could go, guys, look at Viktoria's work down there. Get in touch with her down there, and I encourage you to check out her workshops there. You're at that Waterton Park one. Sounds very interesting. They have that very interesting landscape where it's just like basically prairie flat and then instant mountain, right? Like it's very noticeable.
Yeah, it's a very cool area actually. It's and it's much quieter than kind of Canmore and Banff, and it's a beautiful park, and there's so much variety and so much wildlife. It's a really cool spot.
Awesome. Well, you might just see me there.
Cool.
Viktoria, I want to thank you for coming on today, and I really appreciate your time. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Talk to you soon.
You too. Thank you.